Okay.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're going to get started in just a few moments here. So while we wait for everyone to join. All right. Good morning. We're going to get started in just a few moments because I don't want to miss anything because this should be a really fun one today. All right. So I just want to say good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Hudson Library's virtual author series. Today, we are so pleased to welcome award-winning cookbook author Rose Levy Beranbaum, author of the Cookie Bible. Before I get started, I just want to remind everyone to please check out all of our exciting upcoming programs at hudsonlibrary.org. We have so many fun ones coming up still for the remainder of this year, and let me tell you, spoiler alert, that 2023 is looking very exciting. At any point during this event, you can ask questions. Rose is going to be able to on hand. They're doing a demo and they can help answer some of your holiday baking questions. So please make sure to leave them all in the Q&A section and we'll try to address as many as possible. You can also purchase copies of the Cookie Bible and really any of Rose's books from our local independent bookstore, The Learned Owl, and the link will be in the chat below. So now that I got that out of the way, let me introduce today's speakers. Woody Wilstein started off being Rose's sole cookbook collaborator when she began writing Rose's Heavenly Cakes. Together, they have collaborated for over 17 years in 5 cookbooks, and they were married in 2021. Rose Levy Beranbaum has been called the diva of desserts, the most meticulous cook who ever lived, and a legendary baker. She has published 13 cookbooks, just to name a few: the Cake Bible, which was inducted into the International Association of Culinary Professionals classics, the Baking Bible, and the Cookie Bible, which just came out in October. She has won she's a 3-time James Beard Award winner for her first cookbook, the Cake Bible, Rose's Christmas Cookies, and Desserts. Her recipes have been included in the Silver Plates, New Basics, Food Genius, and she's an internationally known food expert. And Rose, I also saw you were knighted by the Swiss government for your contributions as a journalist.
This was many years ago, but only recently did it occur to me that I really should add it to my bio because it's so cool.
That's amazing. Welcome, Rose and Woody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And welcome everybody to our basement kitchen. When we moved full-time here to Hope, New Jersey, which is on the mountaintop, we turned the entire empty basement into a baking kitchen. And you can see a little of it from here. There's also a separate bread baking section where we couldn't get rid of a girder. We thought, oh, just make it a separate area. So it's really paradise compared to my New York apartment that was, the kitchen baking was in the living room because I just didn't have enough room to function. So today we're going to be doing one of our favorite cookies from the book, the tahini crisps. We thought it would be fun, especially because there are 2 different variations. Variation number 1 is the one that we're making now, and that's with using black tahini. Black tahini is sesame seeds that have not been hulled, and they're dark roasted. And Woody has a brilliant idea now to turn it upside down because you can see this is the chocolate version of tahini, which is something new since the book. I couldn't even write about it. And that's the oil from the sesame seeds that rises to the top. So he turned it upside down, and we're hoping that that works next time we want to measure it out. But the really important thing is that when you do measure it out, weigh or measure, to empty the entire container into a bowl and whisk it, because a lot of the tahini, the thick part, sticks to the bottom, and then you wonder why the dough is so crumbly because it's too oily. So we just discovered that recently when we were doing enough to make over 100, and somebody had done the prep ahead, and it was like, it's so crumbly, we knew right away what had happened. So since this is the main event of the cookie, we thought we'd start with telling you about that. But one of the things that we do and that we write in all the books now is called a mise en place, which is French for putting it in place. And we don't even putting it in place in English anymore because everybody knows what mise is. In most commercial kitchens, I'm going to say mise en place, it's the advanced preparation. You really don't want to get it into the middle of a recipe and find that, oops, I forgot to soften the butter. So the first thing.
So we have our butter.
Mhm.
We have sesame seeds. We have our tahini, egg and vanilla, and our flour, and our leavening, which is baking soda and salt. So, and this basically all goes in order of how we put it in.
And also cookies are really easy, but we thought this demo goes beyond cookies because it really refers to all of baking, to know, understand your ingredients and which to choose and how to measure, which we prefer actually weighing to volume, but we're going to discuss all of that as we start with each ingredient. So you can see the tahini is all ready, and since we did it yesterday, it looks like it hasn't separated yet. And it's going to be different shaping it when you use either the black tahini or the chocolate tahini. The next thing is, should we do next? Butter. Okay. If the butter is not softened enough, it will be, we're using the food processor, but there's also the mixer method, which is less significant for softening the butter because it will soften when it's being beaten. So if it weren't soft enough, I'd squish it before putting it in the food processor. But to help it get soft, at least a half hour before, we cut it into 4 pieces, or tablespoon-sized pieces. And we have a napkin, paper towel. No. Oh, okay. We checked it to make sure of what temperature it was getting to be. This is my favorite instrument in the kitchen, even more than a scale, I dare say, is everything is a temperature, and it makes a huge difference what that temperature is. So this is my Thermapen thermometer, and the new one called Thermapen 1 is said to read in under a second, which is like almost as fast as the human brain, they claim. And it doesn't have a very long immersion. You can just put the very tip in and it will give you a reading. So I'm very dependent on this. And right now, as a matter of fact, because of Black Friday, they're giving, I think, 30% off on all of their thermometers and different oven thermometers, different devices.
Butter is at 70 degrees, so
Which is
right
great.
on target.
Okay, because yesterday when we were doing this ahead, it was 65 and it was just not mixing in. Although by the time you add the tahini, it mixes anyway. It's not a big deal mixing a cookie dough, but doing it in the food processor is really quick. And with a chocolate one, you can shape it right after it comes out because it doesn't heat up compared to the mixer.
Okay, next,
Okay.
the egg.
Yeah, egg. This is a big deal because I don't know if you've all noticed, but we started noticing a few years ago already that the proportion of yolk to white has changed. And even in an extra large or jumbo egg, there's not as much yolk as there used to be in the basic large egg. So that's why we put in a range. If we say 6 yolks, we say 6 to 9, because it may take that many more yolks to get the right amount. And yolks are very important in all baking. They're an emulsifier, which means they mix things together, they get flavor. Okay, so I happen to be using this little Crackham, but if I didn't have one, and I don't think they're making them anymore, I just tap it on a paper towel because on the side of the bowl, it may crack, or it usually does crack, and it's hard to fish out. So just one crack. If it's really fragile, it's because they're not feeding enough calcium to their chickens. But the reason that they're getting smaller is because in industry, they are actually using younger laying hens and they make smaller eggs. Okay, Woody, I put a whole bunch of paper towels and I don't see a single one. Paper towels and plastic wrap are my 2 most important things. Okay, so we're going to weigh the egg, and people are always saying, well, why do you say half an egg? How can we use half an egg? It's really easy by either weight or measure. That we know that an egg is normally 50 grams, so we want 25.
So we have a scale here. Tear out the weight.
And the great thing about weighing and scales now is that they're so affordable and they're so much more accurate. Okay, can I see? Yeah.
Yes, you.
And this is going to be 25. Okay, we're almost there. And then I like to mix the vanilla in with the egg because it keeps the vanilla from evaporating. If you measure out vanilla ahead, yeah, perfect. It's going to be. It's going to.
You want 1 gram more.
Stop telling on me.
Well, one reason we talk about that is, let's say you do put too much in. Eggshells are a great way to remove excess, whether it's whites or yolks, because they act like a magnet.
Yeah, they suck it back in. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I'm pretending.
Okay. So I was saying that if you just measure out the vanilla ahead, it's going to evaporate by the time you use it because it's very volatile. It's distilled in alcohol. So you can see even with the screw cap, we do this with alcohol too. You put a little piece of plastic wrap and it's 1/4 teaspoon. If you're not using ingredients right away, it's always a good idea to keep them covered. Okay, and also because it is alcohol, it would really stain the marble. So I put it right on, I'm very careful, and I put it right on, not that careful. And where's the plastic wrap? Just disappeared.
Yeah.
Rose, we have a few questions if you have time.
Oh,
For-
sure.
We have a couple people wanting to know about room temperature. How long should you lay out butter for to achieve room temperature, and what temperature do you consider at temp?
Well, for cakes, I always say between 65 and 75 degrees for butter. And that would be what I would consider room temperature to be. But if you're working in a hot kitchen and it's summer, then you really are better off working in your living room or someplace else, or just work faster and not let the things overheat. Some things are more critical than others, like butter. If it's too high, you'll end up with a cake that has a coarse texture. And if it's too low, also.
Yeah.
So that's why if you're between 65 and 75, and you can get, I mean, ThermoWorks makes a really wonderful thermometer they call the Spot, so you can see what the temperature is. But there are many other devices, and even the Thermopen that's used to insert things reads room temperature, ambient temperature really well. We're going to get into oven temperature
Yeah.
next.
And in all of our books, in prior to Baking Basics book, which came out back in 2018, on the chart, on the recipe chart itself, we would say say room temperature and specify the temperature there. With the Mise en Place, we say right down the Mise en Place. We say 30 minutes ahead.
Oh yeah,
Bring out the butter.
asking how
30 minutes
long?
ahead. Do that.
Well, it can take an hour even at
Yeah.
70 degrees. That's why if you cut the butter up, it will go faster.
Okay.
And if you need to speed it up, smushing it with your fingers also helps too. I would do that when I'm putting it in the food processor even.
Okay.
Okay, so next is the flour. And that's the biggie, because flour, when a recipe calls for all-purpose flour, it rarely says whether it's bleached or unbleached. And yes, there is a difference. The unbleached has higher protein, slightly higher, but enough to affect the way things work. I'm not even going to talk about cakes right now because we're doing cookies. But basically, because it is higher protein, it does two things. It browns faster, which can be good for some cookies, and that's why we call for it in some cookies. But it also, it sucks up the water because of the higher protein. So that means there's less for it to puff. And also it's stiffer, so it doesn't spread as much. And when you know all these things, you can adjust and choose what flour you want in order to get the effect you want. Some people want puffy cookies, some want a crunchy cookie. And thank you, Woody, because I said, please put it right back in the container. I just found out some really valuable information recently from General Mills themselves. And that's that I've always been worried about the shelf life, which it says on different bags, and everything has to have a shelf life. I mean, they say it has to, but in fact, if you keep it tightly sealed, it's indefinite. Nothing will happen to it. The big enemy is losing moisture, and that's when it loses its strength and behaves differently.
Or critters getting inside.
Well, that's unbleached flour. I remember when I once brought a bag of organic flour into the house and not realizing that I would end up getting, what's it called again? Those weevils. Yeah, there was a movie with Russell Crowe, and they were making a joke about weevils, but it's no joke when it gets into your flour, because although cake flour is not, it's usually, well, we always have bleached pink flour, it's not susceptible to it if you just have cake flour. But if you bring in another flour, it will contaminate the cake flour as well. Everything had to be thrown out. The only solution, if you want to get organic flour or unbleached whole grain, is to put the bag of flour in the freezer for 3 days, and it will kill any latent weevils that might exist.
So we're gonna measure out the flour. We also mark on our bags expiration time, because sometimes we forget, how long we've had that flour.
Yeah, it's kind of good to know, but
So we do
I'm
that.
much less worried about it than I used to. I used to keep them all in the freezer. In fact, I have some 00 Italian flour that's been in there 15 years and it works wonderfully. So I'm always trying to find out just how long things can stay. And often it's not because I want to find out, it's because I've forgotten they're in there. So the bleached flour we're using, it's half a cup. And if you'd use volume, the way we do it is we measure it by lightly spooned into the cup. Because if you dip and sweep, you might get, instead of 1 cup, 1 3/4 cups. That's the difference it makes. Flour settles. But if you weigh, it's always the same. So
Advantages of
71
weighing or what?
Oh, precision, ease, and accuracy.
And less bowls to clean up.
That's part of the ease. Okay. The
Is
only
this-
thing I really don't like working backwards is on my KitchenAid, because I tend to, and I think I'm turning it low, it goes on high because it's backwards. But I do prefer using the food processor for many things, and where I prefer the mixer, we definitely specify. Okay, this is 770.
70.
And you know, with cookies, they're so forgiving. What I recommend,
Boom.
thank you, Woody. What I recommend is if you're in doubt and you're not weighing, take off a piece of the dough and bake it as a test cookie. And you'll see if maybe it's too soft, it's spreading too much. You can either put it in the refrigerator after it's shaped and before baking, so it sets faster, or you can dust your hands with flour. And that way you're adding enough and not really activating the dough. Although with cookie dough, there's enough sugar to protect it. Generally doesn't toughen, even if you mix the whole batch again.
Yeah.
So
We're all
there's-
back and stored, and let's go back to the storage area.
Rose, we have a couple quick questions about flour, if you have time. Angela and Mary would both like to know, do you always sift your flour, or is that something they should be doing?
That's a really good question, because in the cake Bible, I noticed that I put sifted cake flour, but what I really meant was that if you're measuring it, sift into the cup and level it off. So there's no reason to sift a fine flour, but when you're making a sponge cake or a genoise, which is a sponge cake, and you want to mix the flour at the end, and you want it to not weight down and make the batter heavy, then I sift it right into the batter, maybe a third at a time, and fold it in. Oh, Woody, could you reach over? Because I used to say for the flat whisk, he introduced me to this flat whisk that we found at the Chicago Housewares Show years ago. They're commonly available. And I used to say when you're folding things into a sponge cake, to either use a slotted skimmer or a huge balloon whisk. But this little simple device comes in different sizes, does a wonderful job of mixing without breaking it down as much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And
It's bigger, brother.
and if anybody wants to know about how never again to beat an overbeaten egg white, we'll get into that as well.
So,
So, yes, the next thing is the salt and
and the baking soda.
baking soda. And here the baking soda will make it brown more, which is a good thing. I got this years ago at a pottery studio. I like all different devices that aren't necessarily intended for baking. Now, baking soda tends to lump. So here's how I measure it. I mean, I also have a scale that can weigh really minute amounts, but I tend not to use it mostly, except when I'm testing a recipe and want to establish a guideline, because it's easy to use measuring spoons. But quite honestly, all measuring spoons are not created equal. And I worked with the guy making the perfect ones free of charge, so I would have something to recommend and something that I could use. And now it doesn't exist anymore, so I cannot recommend any measuring spoons. But if you find that things are rising too much and collapsing, it's probably that you've put too much leavening in and your spoons are not accurate. So this is a 16th. I now put a 16th of a teaspoon because that's equivalent to a normal pinch. Like maybe his would be larger and mine would be smaller, but that's why it's easy to standardize. I don't want salt in cookies to hit you that, oh, these are nice salty. I'd rather that they be there to elevate the other flavors and you don't even know it's there.
So this we whisk up.
Because it really doesn't evenly distribute ingredients to sift them together. But in some cakes, I will actually do this and then sift it to make sure that it integrates. And then we always specify.
Right.
Okay.
Last thing are sugars.
So we can move, we don't need the scale.
Yes, we do.
Oh, because he wants to show how we do it. Okay. Now this particular scale, which is in the Scali, is one of the ones that we like. which is the other one? My Way is not
My
as
Way.
durable, but it also is very accurate and affordable. So we put the food processor directly on. And by the way, I don't know if they still make such small food processors, but it's a small amount of dough. So if you don't have a small one, then you would go to either the mixer or double the batter.
This is a 6-cup.
Dough, rather.
So in here we have brown sugar.
And actually, it's muscovado sugar because all these things make a difference to the final outcome and flavor. And this particular muscovado sugar comes from the island of Mauritius, which is a volcanic island off the coast of India. So it had, anything growing in volcanic soil, like the tomatoes in Sicily, have extra flavor. Also, storing brown sugar when it lumps, and it will, even though we have a really airtight container. I don't know if they still make these, but there are many different varieties. What we do is if we always look at it the night before if we haven't baked for a while. We either take a little glass measure like this size, and then we put a wet paper towel in, or make a little nest of foil, maybe 2 layers because you don't want it to leak through. And then we put the wet paper towel in. If it's really stiff, it could take a few days, but it always softens.
And also we have granulated sugar goes in this as well.
Yeah, the two are together.
So we've put this in already here. I'm gonna take this off the scale.
See, this is what I like about doing it in the food processor. You don't have to use super fine sugar, even for recipes that call for it, because you can process it to that consistency. But spice mills will also work for that small amounts, just do in batches. Because that super fine sugar is really expensive, and fine granulated is so much less. So that's why I like to give that tip.
So instructions read that we run the sugar in here because you want to get nice and ground up, and there's any lumps have it pulverized on the brown sugar until it's basically nice and fine and even consistency. And this takes a few minutes.
But we've already done it.
So we're gonna stop.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you can all see, but I love this processor so much. And when the handle broke off, Woody fixed it. I don't know if you can see these are bolts. So we have a hope to keep it going a few more years at least.
Okay, so
So now we put the butter.
Yep.
And can you hear okay when the motor's on? Because otherwise I'll stop the motor. Can you all hear?
You can hear perfectly.
okay. So
all right.
one at a time. Boom.
If it's too hard, it will jump right out. Well, we were doing this demo in Cambridge last week. They only had a robo crew that was the right size, which is a really heavy duty one. But it has such a small hole. If you tried dropping butter through it, it would end up on the lid rather than letting it. Boom. So I'll sort of want to make sure you get all your ingredients in. Okay, looks like it's doing beautifully. Yep, no lumps of butter. And now the tahini.
So we have a couple questions. One, I noticed we had a lot of people asking about what equipment you recommend because they are very interested. And I put a link in the chat from your website, which is your website is so helpful, I should say. That has all of your recommended equipment on there. Is that the best place to find everything you guys suggest?
Yeah, Woody is always reminding me to tell you all that one of the main benefits of the blog is that it also gives us the opportunity of putting in any corrections that happen or any new technology or new information about a recipe. And we've decided we're doing the complete revision, new edition for the 35th anniversary of the Cake Bible. And we've decided to really minimize equipment recommendations because they change even faster than ingredients do. And I've been speaking of ingredients, I've been recommending Organic Valley butter. It's been available for years and it's cultured and I love the flavor of it. And they just decided to not make it ever again, or at least not now. So that's why I think it's important to look at reviews that are available online. I mean, I love the Cuisinart mixer. That used to be, I forget what name it went under. It's from England. And then now I don't think it exists anymore. So I tested everything KitchenAid because that has been around forever. It may not be the way it once was, where they had all metal, what is it called again?
Parts.
Well, there's a special part that now is being made in plastic, so it doesn't last forever. And I see they're now making ceramic bowls, which means that when they break, you have to replace them, whereas the stainless steel is forever. That's forever. Few things are. All right, so I'm going to pulse it so it doesn't start jumping up. I know this thing is useful, but I tend not to use it when it's only a few seconds. Good. And now just process until it's smooth and creamy. And in the mixing method, I add the egg a little at a time, but here it goes so fast I can just add it completely. But I always wipe down the sides because scrape down the sides. This is this very special spatula I've had for 100 years. It's all broken up because if you try to use a scraper and you end up going too deeply against the blades, it will do what this has. So that's why when I empty it out or go too far down, I like to use the one that's already damaged. And
talking about equipment, one thing we stress is that separate your savory equipment from your baking equipment. We have one here because our savory kitchen's upstairs, but separate out silicone and things because they will absorb orders, and you don't want to get that garlic smell into a chocolate cake, or in this case, our tahini cookies.
yeah, in fact, if you don't have a separate baking kitchen, which I never did before, use a different color spatulas because they come in all different colors. And glass, of course, is non-reactive, so that when you put it in the dishwasher, will never retain an odor. But most plastics do, and you don't want your baking things to taste like garlic. So now the flour. Oh, now the egg. Okay. The only reason, really, when using the food processor to whisk the eggs, or the egg, or the half egg, is to make it easier to measure or weigh, because even when weighing, it kind of sticks to itself. Thank you. I'll just pulse this part.
Very good.
Thank you. I've had experience,
Yeah.
45, 50 years.
Flour, baking soda, and salt.
Mhm.
We had someone, Jen, would like to know, can you make your own superfine sugar by grinding it in a coffee grinder? So if
Coffee.
I
You mean
haven't
the
cooked.
kind with little blades?
I
So many kinds of
believe
coffee
so.
grinder.
In a food processor, yeah, you can. Be aware though that the sugar will scratch the bowl slightly. So in doing that, but you can do it.
I'll put this in. Yeah, if it's like a spice mill or the kind of coffee grinder that has little blades, it will work. You just have to do it in batches.
And you might have to do quite a few.
I had my Cuisinart food processor for about a year before I ever dared use it. I was so used to using a knife. We have to scrape. But you can see it's getting a little charcoal gray now. Oh, wait, and before we shape it, well, we actually, with this black tahini and with blonde tahini, you have to refrigerate it for at least an hour or it's just too sticky. But with the chocolate tahini, it binds it up so you can do it right away. And so now, here's my trick of taking out something really sticky from a food processor, is I get out as much as I can, put it into a bowl, and then whatever's left, I spin it around and the centrifugal action will spin it off the blades. And that way you can get the whole thing. Are you looking? Don't tell me we can't. I tell you where I put it, down in the lower drawer. We'd really be stuck if we couldn't find it. Because then I have to show how to do it this way and it's not going to be fun. You see it?
In the very bottom drawer.
All right, I'm going to have to get it. It's in one of those drawers. Now, the interesting thing about shaping it, well, let me know if you need help.
Yeah, we're gonna need it.
At least I'm not tied to a microphone.
Okay.
Where did that go? Oh, we were going to put it into a styrofoam. Remember?
Okay. We're gonna be moving the camera for just a second. We forgot this part. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
We were supposed to put it in a styrofoam with ice to make sure it stayed cool during our discussion.
Okay, now you can see our knife set.
It's very impressive. Just to remind you, everyone, to check out, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A. And we posted the link for all the corrections and enhancements for the Cookie Bible. It's in the chat.
Yeah.
I don't even see it. Do we put it again? Ah, it's on here. We changed the bowl.
We're coming back.
Wouldn't that be funny? We thought everything through so carefully, you couldn't find it. All right. Just stationed correctly now? Because we can-
Oops, no, no, my head's gonna come out.
well, it doesn't matter.
You go, yeah.
By the way, I know you saw those knives. You should see all the ones upstairs. I inherited a lot of them and, well, there are a lot of knives, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna leave this covered so it doesn't dry out. And we'll
No.
deal with that.
Well,
pick it up.
we're gonna scoop it out here.
Not right now. Okay, when we discuss that, we're gonna move right on. What do you want to have something to do here? Okay. So I weigh the cookies, but you don't have to do that. Okay, so,
What?
and I won't do it now either. What?
Okay, what I was gonna say,
Oh, go ahead.
is. For all our recipes, we, at the top of the chart, put the gram weight, the total gram weight that you should get, so. We'll pretend here that I could weigh out a bowl. Yeah, scrape all that in there and you can check your weight. So in this case, our total weight is 360 grams, and that way you can determine whether did I forget something, because it happens. So you forget, oh, I forgot to put it in the sugar.
Well, actually, when I weighed it yesterday, it was 375 because we always go under because you don't want people to be disappointed that they go less. And we're vigilant, is that the word, scrapers. We scrape every last bit out of everything.
I mean, I don't know if you've had happened to you where, let's say you got the Betty Crocker cookbook and you make pancakes, they tell you get 10 and I only got 6 because they usually,
Yeah, we didn't want that to happen.
so we fudge it for you people.
So if you're looking for something to do, you can finish doing all of these if you like. But yesterday I made, instead of 10, which is a half batch, which is all we would do on each sheet, I made 11 by mistake, and so you got to eat 1, and now we'll only have 9.5. Okay, so this is about a tablespoon, and here's the thing, that with the regular blonde tahini, all you have to do is make the ball, dip it in the sesame, and then it will flatten out by itself to 3.5-inch cookies, I think, is it? Well, whatever was on final size here, no, it's 2.25 inch, okay. But with the chocolate one and the black tahini ones, you have to flatten it slightly. So I would flatten it, and it's in the recipe, to 1.5 inches, and then it will spread out by 1/4 inch. Or 1/2 inch rather, okay. Whatever, it will spread out. Okay, so I'm dipping it into the sesame seeds, and these are hulled sesame seeds because I think they make a nicer contrast. They also have more flavor than the unhulled. And then I can just flatten it slightly. We'll see what 1.5 inches looks like. You're already ready to go?
I'm waiting for you to do that one.
Okay. See, when you press it, then you can even pick up more. And in fact, because we're pressing it more, we're going to need more sesame seeds than is indicated in the recipe. That was for the base recipe, the amount of sesame seeds. But you can't buy them in a small amount anyway. So let's see, this is 1.5 exactly.
Here's our cookie.
And don't worry if it's a little uneven, like wavy, because it's going to flatten out when it bakes. And of course, you want always cookies to be separated. And I'm sure somebody's going to ask, do I always use parchment? In many cookies, you don't have to. It tends to keep it from spreading as much because it's less slippery, but also it's easier to clean up. And if I'm doing a whole bunch at a time, what I'll do is I'll have some of them set on a piece of parchment. And if they need to be refrigerated, I slide a cookie sheet under it. And then I put it on the cookie sheet when the first one comes out. But you don't want it to be on a hot cookie sheet unless you're going to put it right in the oven because it will immediately start spreading and baking.
Well, one advantage of weighing again is I got my little ball here, and
It's only 15. Oh, 19.
19.
It went up to 19.
so take it off.
And that's how it's good to have some extra, because when you do by volume, it's very hard. Or even by weighing, sometimes I think, all right, it doesn't have to be exactly 18, but I want to end up with the right number of cookies.
We have a ball here. In fact, one of my duties, we're upstairs, is weighing out the meatballs.
Oh, it's a joint team effort thing.
I win, you squawk,
Oh, that's true. Okay.
you form.
Well, things bake more evenly. Like, say didn't do them evenly and you would have them all on the same sheet. And then the smaller ones would be finished before the bigger ones were baked. So the bigger ones would be underbaked. And if you continue baking and don't take off the smaller ones, they get dry. But the nice thing about this type of cookie, and most of them actually, is that you can take it out. If you think you want it to bake longer, just put it back in. You can't do that with a cake. But with most of the cookies, you could actually do that. So it's better to underbake because small cookies continue baking when you take them out of the oven. And that's why with these and many other ones, you have to let them sit on the pan for maybe a minute. Well, that isn't wise because you don't want them to break. You want them to firm up. But then they will continue baking as they sit. Okay, you're always the master of that. You're dropping dough. Okay. And of course, if you push yesterday's cookies, I flattened more, and that's why they're larger. I just wanted to see what would happen if I could get more sesame seeds into it. I like baking just one tray at a time because
I roll you.
good. It's good that to do it together. In fact, cookies are a wonderful thing to do with your kids and also
Why is that?
to do with family. Well, because it's the best possible lesson and it's easy in everything. Just about, patience and art, science.
Math.
Yeah, especially math. Notice I leave out math all the time because that's not my strong subject, which is why there are no mistakes in my charts and recipes because I know I'm not good at it. So I make sure to double check a million times and still sometimes there are mistakes. But when you assume you know something and you don't, you're in bigger trouble. So thank you, Woody. Let's see, is there anything else that we wanted to be sure to mention? Oh yeah, ovens. Again, just there are no two measuring sets that are the same. There are no two ovens that are the same, that are going to bake the same. And if your oven drops a lot in temperature when you open it up and doesn't regain it as fast, to make a more even oven, put a baking stone in it and just leave it in. Some ovens that say put nothing on the floor of an oven. So you put it on the lower shelf.
On that note, a question we've been asked actually twice on our website. One thing we do on our website too is we have an actual ask a questions section where if you have a question, well, just go to the website and put in ask a question and we'll do our best to answer. We try to answer within 48 hours unless we're traveling, doing like book touring like right now.
Right now, we're happy to be baking in our own kitchen and sharing this with you because you have so much more control of what happens when you're working with your own equipment and your own ingredients and your own room temperatures.
And old ovens.
Although I must say Cambridge Culinary is one of the best schools I've ever taught at. They just had 7 different people helping us with the prep. Of course, we had 3 different things. One of them was ice cream, and one of them was the truffle cookies. That is our favorite chocolate cookie. The truffle is baked into the cookie. And they wanted to make over 100 of them. So it certainly was helpful to, and we discovered a couple of important things. One was that the sesame paste, about how it clumps up at the bottom. And the other was that we put that to use a ring to shape and to leave it on like a little metal ring to keep it on while it's baking to have the right shape so that it doesn't spread too much. But we discovered that you really don't have to do that if you just spread them to 2 inches or pat them down to 2 inches. And also the truffle shouldn't be rock hard from the freezer. It should be softened slightly so that way it doesn't poke up through the dough. But even if it did, it still stays soft. And I think we ate the final ones yesterday and it was a week ago. If you underbake them slightly, it's great. You just want the outside to be firm because then the truffle stays really creamy. But even if you overbake it, ganache doesn't get hard, so it will be fine. And this is a recipe that was given to us by a really dear friend who's a chocolatier in Texas. He also is a translator of French cookbooks around the world. And he recently did one, The Rooftops of Paris, that I'm dying to see. So that's Zach Townsend. And we all finished? Yeah, 2 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We still got 10. That was because of the extra one. Okay. So now we could either bake these right away, we could freeze them and bake them from the frozen, or we could refrigerate them and bake them later today.
We talked earlier about corrections. One thing on our website, you can go to any of our books on the main page. In fact, I think we sent the sheet out to you folks where whether it's by us or by the publisher, usually it's the publisher will claim it. Their errors can happen in the book from just misprints or wrong ingredients being read, whatever. We had one where every 2/3 cup was marked in as 1/3 cup. We had to go back and correct that. So if we can't correct on the printing, we do include it on the website. And including with that, we also include enhancements like this. What we learned about in the culinary school, we had that as enhancements. We call it corrections and enhancements for whatever book you're using. And please, if you do see something you think is not quite right, please write into us. Yeah, but please first check that correction page first, because we probably identified it.
We'll put the link again to your website because it's so helpful. Not only does it have all of the corrections and enhancements, it has, you can contact them if you have any baking questions. And you also do like weekly baking tips. You have a bunch
supposed to be every week, and we generally try to do every week, but I'm in charge of them. We're on tour, then sometimes that doesn't quite happen. But there's about 50 of them on there, so you can always go into baking tips in general and just start scrolling. You'll see quite a few.
Well, also because we've done so many virtual podcasts and interviews, I've tried to keep them all active on Instagram. I mean, I don't know if they stay forever, but I think they do. It could be a problem. And now, of course, they probably won't be on Twitter anymore. But if you want to hear some of the interviews, and they also offer recipes on some of them, like Evan Kleinman from LA I just posted it yesterday for the snickerdoodles with caramel filling. And she offers the recipe on her site. And it's only 11 minutes of talk, but it's really delightful. I wrote that I sometimes think I write books just so I can get to be on Evan's show. I've known her for so long. And these days when you could see people, at least you could still connect that way. And we feel we've created really a community of bakers around the world. It's so thrilling to find out what people are doing in Africa and India. You know, it used to be so isolated before when the Cake Bible came out. That was 34 years ago now, and couldn't communicate that way. So it's a really wonderful thing the internet can provide, along with some misinformation, not hopefully from us, but the internet really is a great thing. And by the way, when you let these sit, if it's just a half hour at room temperature or in the refrigerator, it's fine. But if it's more than that, always cover with plastic wrap because you don't want it to dry out. Oh, I was talking about oven temperature. I used to say the best way to determine if your oven is baking accurately is to make one of the cakes from the Cake Bible. That's say it says 25 to 35 minutes. If it takes longer than that, turn up the oven at maybe 25 degrees. And if it takes shorter, turn it down, because you can't just change the baking time and expect, or rather you can't bake it too long and then think it's going to have the same texture. It just will drop. All sorts of bad things happen. But now that ThermoWorks has such accurate thermometers, they also have excellent probe thermometers with cable. So you can actually put it into the oven and see the temperature, even see the fluctuation of temperature. So you don't have to go to that extreme, but if you find that things aren't baking accurately, the common denominator of failure is usually the oven. Okay. Oh,
we have a couple questions about ovens when you get a chance.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is called the square dot.
Yeah. By the way, we don't use convection for cookies. I mean, even though it's very even, it could also distort them because if you can't turn on the fan. When we got to Cambridge Culinary, I saw that all they had was Blodgett oven, which is kind of the Rolls Royce of commercial ovens, I think. But also, I've had those little papillons, the butterflies in the book, I've had them fly off the parchment. That's how powerful they are. And I thought, oh no. But then they said that Blodgett now makes 4 fan speeds. You can't turn it off, but you can turn it down.
Tell about the other.
Oh, and when I saw them flying off, this was amazing because years ago I took a class. Shirley Courier of Bakewise and Cookwise and I we met in Washington, D.C. at Académie de la Cuisine, and we took a class with Ron Mesnier, who's the White House pastry chef. And he was teaching us pâte à choux, cream puff pastry, and also the little butterflies, the papillons, that were made with langue de chat, it's called, the cat's tongue, finest, thinnest possible batter that you spread onto a template and then you lift the template off. So he said, to the people who are doing that part of the assignment. He said, be sure and stick the parchment down with a pâte à choux, the cream puff pastry, because it's like glue. I have to talk about egg white. It's like glue. And all of a sudden we're in the oven and somebody said, chef, the butterflies are flying in the oven. And he said, I still remember his voice. I told you to stick it down with a pâte à choux. And he said, no, no, not the parchment. They're flying off the parchment. That's how powerful the motor was. Egg whites. And then we'll get back to oven questions because we still have enough time. Okay. I use cream of tartar. A lot of people use cream of tartar, but not as much as I do, because I was determined one day to see just how much I could use and what would happen. And I found that if you use, and it's in the book, because we have meringue cookies, it's so important. 1/8 of a teaspoon, even if it's not totally accurate teaspoon, it's within the range of cream of tartar, which is just a byproduct of the wine industry, and per egg white. But now that the egg yolks are shrinking, the egg whites are growing. So you have to be sure and use either 30 grams or 2 tablespoons of egg white. So if you use that and you can put it right in before even starting to beat the egg white, you can never overbeat them. You can never make them dry. Well, maybe if you did it more than a half hour, but I've tried up to a half hour. And you know what happens is if they break down and you overbeat them without enough cream of tartar, when you fold it into a mousse or you fold it into a cake or a sponge cake, it breaks down and you lose all the air that you've gotten and all the stability. So that's why I wanted to be sure and share that, even though it's not used in most cookies.
We also use cream of tartar in a couple of instances too. One is if you're making a cheesecake, for example, it has a custard and like a water bath. And let's say using an aluminum pan, sprinkle about a half a teaspoon of cream of tartar in there first and pour the hot water in. That will help keep the aluminum pan from discoloring. You also use cream of tartar for caramel.
Oh yeah, the acidity of cream of tartar keeps the crystals from forming. So I use that, and I use glucose, and actually corn syrup and glucose are pretty much the same, except glucose is thicker. And now it's readily available in the whole candy supply baking stores. But if you wanted to make your own, I don't know if we put that, I don't think we put it in the cookie book, it's in the ice cream book. But what you do is, say you take for 1 cup, you take a half a cup of the corn syrup, bring it to a full boil and add it to the remaining half cup, and you get the consistency of glucose. So that's kind of a helpful thing to know.
But you had some baking questions.
Yeah.
On ovens.
We have a lot of questions. People have been loving all your explanations.
Good. We got 15 minutes.
People, thank you. You've thoroughly explained so much. Just to do a few rapid fire ones. You were right, Rose. We did have a lot of questions on parchment, but someone wanted to circle back. Jen would want to know, could you use silpats instead of parchment?
Oh, that's a good question. I do use it for when I want something like caramel cookies, lace cookies to absolutely come off the sheet. But if I want it to be crisp on the bottom, then I would prefer parchment because it doesn't breathe. You know, the silpat doesn't allow it to absorb any moisture into the silpat. But there was something else about silpat. Well, I'll get to it because I don't want to hold up the next question.
Just going off ovens, you had talked about, Nancy wanted to know, do you prefer gas or an electric? And Janet, to piggyback off that, she asked if you use a convection, which you had talked about, but if you are using one, do you have any adjustments?
Okay, wait, yes, but I want to get back to the pans and the parchment for a sec, because I remember this really important thing is that if your cookie should not burn on the bottom, and if you find that they're baking too fast, either raise them to a higher shelf or double pan, or use one of those insulated sheets. It's I mean, I don't think most of the recipes here are going to have that happen, but different ovens bake differently, so that's important. Now, gas versus electric, I found that my gas oven has much less fluctuation in the range when it goes up and down, but electric ovens are very even, or to some extent, because I still like to turn the cookies halfway through, not meringue cookies because they'll crack, but like basic cookie dough, because either, you know, it really depends on the oven, but both, we have lots of electric ones, lots of gas ones, maybe not lots, just one gas and lots of countertop ones. And, and each one bakes
the wolf's that way.
Yeah, I still have my large wolf from New York City. So did I answer that, or was there another part of it?
If someone was using a convection oven.
Sorry, in convection. Well, conventional wisdom is that you turn it down 25 degrees. But when we worked in Vancouver, we made a wedding cake for Nathan Fong, if anybody remembers him. He was so wonderful that we actually offered to go and make it as a present. And when we saw that oven, we thought we'd better try it out. We had to make big bottom extra cake twice, 3 times, because each time a different chef said, turn it down 25 degrees or use it exactly as it is. It had to be 50 degrees less. So you really have to go by the result. You know, the proof is in the pudding. And the wonderful thing with cookies anyway, is that you can just bake so few to see how your oven's bake.
So if you have a recipe that does work for you and you move to a new residence, use that recipe as your basis for checking your oven.
Good point.
That's very helpful. We also have some people wanting to know, you had talked about freezing the cookies. How long can they stay frozen, and can you freeze ganache?
Oh, we do.
Oh,
We have
yes.
some right now, as a matter of fact, coming out for Thanksgiving. Yes, ganache freezes beautifully, but most things that you freeze should not be just taken out at room temperature to thaw. It should be thawed overnight in the refrigerator, a slow thaw. And worst comes to worst with the ganache, if somehow isn't as smooth as it could be, then you can put it in the microwave, but just 3-second bursts and stir so that you don't break it down. I like making ganache in the food processor. I think it's most foolproof, except for glaze where you don't want to get bubbles in. But there was another question that we didn't address as part of that. Oh yeah, freezing cookies. Well, you know, there are freezers and freezers. I keep saying everything has its own mind. You know, we have 3 different freezers and it's a blessing, but it's no wonder we don't find anything we're looking for because they're all stocked full. And they say 10 degrees below 0, and you can freeze a lot longer than if it's either at 0 or above 0. So I would say with any freezer, probably 3 months would be a good estimate. I've frozen things a lot longer, but you know, if you have kids and they leave open the door to go shopping in the freezer to see what's there, it's going to drop and then come up again. So that's just a rule of thumb.
Sounds good.
Take it out of hand. Okay, next question.
Diane would like to know, when creaming butter and sugar, how do you know it should be a short time just to incorporate, or do you need it to be like, do you go by color? Is there a time? She said some recipes don't specify.
Ooh.
Well, you do. I think. The thing is that usually when you're creaming butter and sugar, it's to give an aeration to it. And so the more air you get in, the less dense and the lighter the color. And it gets somewhat fluffy. So that's my rule of thumb. Oh, Woody got out something really important, baking powder. The non-aluminum, this is a calcium based. Aluminum gives a really nasty taste to cookies and pie dough. I don't think anybody else puts a baking powder in pie dough. Oh, recently, Shilpa, it was Kokovic who wrote the intro to the book with her husband Miro. She's working now, she's food editor of Bon Appetit, and she adapted my recipe, my favorite cream cheese recipe, and she specified baking powder and aluminum, non-aluminum, because if you have an aluminum based one, which is more common, and you put it in a cake, you can't generally tell it's there because there's so many other things in a cake. But with a cookie or pie crust, you really notice the bitterness. Also, baking powder varies from day to day as far as weight, but as far as volume to weight. So what we do is, well, the only totally accurate weight, we have it at 4.5 grams, but most people don't have a scale to do that. See, when we test by weight so we can know to have a guideline for people, but then we say a teaspoon. And the only way you can be sure you're getting the exact amount is by sifting it into the teaspoon. But now the teaspoons are all off. I don't need to be discouraging, but what I mean to say is that if the results are off, then either your spoons are too large or too small, and you just adjust from there. There is a range of acceptability. Like if you make a cake and you're using bleached flour and you still have it drop and have coarse texture, chances are too much baking powder or baking soda.
Thank you.
Salt is always the same. That's what's so wonderful. That's what we use as our test. So what is salt today? Oh, good. Always 6 grams. What is baking powder? You know, it's like really very strange. It's the only ingredient that cannot be the same.
Okay, next question.
Meredith actually has a very good question here. She would like to know, what is the best way to convert recipes that are measured into a recipe that uses weights? Because you always mention the weight of how much something should be.
It's going to be trial and error, because if somebody says a cup of flour and they don't say how they measured it, then you don't know if it's by dip and sweep or lightly spoon. I mean, if it's a recipe you know and love, then you can create your own standard.
Yeah, look, so technically, if you have a scale, then you can, because then you could
See what your
scoop out
usual
a,
way of
that,
doing it.
or if you get one of our books, you can pretty much, you got a whole weight chart right there, because you can go through you go through any of the recipes and say, oh, one egg is 50 grams, oh, yolk is 20 grams, and the white is 30. You can invent your own weight chart. The one problem with that, though, is it depends on the author. For example, there's 2 authors who have books out right now. One author has egg yolks at 15 grams. So if that's her standard and you're going to base everything off of her, then you got to use her standard. Where we're at 20. Another author is actually 21.5. So it depends on the author. The biggest one, though, is flour, because we've seen authors where they'll just say 143 grams flour. But they don't tell you if it's dip or sweep. Or they'll say it's spooned a couple levels up. One might be 120, and next one will be 124. So it depends on the author's book you're using, whose weight chart you want to use.
But if it's your own family recipe, then you're in control. You can create your own weights based on what has worked for you. We should answer the next question. There is one.
Someone else would like to know, do you have a preference of food processor over a stand mixer? I think you talked about that briefly,
But you know what I didn't talk about is our favorite cookies. So I want to quickly say a couple of other ones that we really adore. Lemon butter bars has long been my favorite, non-chocolate. But in the cookie Bible, I put in a layer of cranberries, the dried cranberries that have been steamed or moistened so that they're not dry anymore, but they have that tang. Not only is it beautiful, but the combination of lemon and cranberry and then shortbread is just really wonderful. Let's see what else. Oh, so the Syrian dough. It's so easy. It's amazing that you think it'd be harder to work with, but it turns out to be as tender as difficult to work with dough. And they're stuffed with, I think, fig or date. I forget which date. Date. Yeah, date. It's something that's a product, but you can also stuff it with duxelle, with mushrooms, and make it savory as well. Woody's peppercockers, everybody adores them. They ride the cusp of sweet and savory because you can spread them with goat cheese or another soft cheese, or have them as a dessert. And they have a lot of different spices. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the ones I'm craving. The jumbles, David Schamel's jumbles. When people say I'd like a cookie that's less sweet, I use as little sugar as I can because I don't like to taste sugar before everything else. But the jumbles have just the bare minimum of dough to hold together all those wonderful mix of nuts. Oh, and always taste walnuts before using. You cannot smell rancidity. And it's really tragic when you have to throw out the whole batch because not only that it's not healthy, but it tastes awful. So that's walnuts has a lot of oil, and that's the one that I've found has the most problem.
Okay, other questions?
We do. We have one more before we end. I just want to say thank you so much for everything today. Also, we're going to post the link again. If you're looking to purchase the Cookie Bible from our local independent bookstore, The Learned Owl, the link will be in the chat. The book is just packed full of amazing recipes and so much helpful baking tips that I think you are going to love. Also, it's perfect time for the holiday season. It will help take the guesswork out of baking. But the final question we've had it several times in the chat. People love your aprons and they would like to know, where can they find those?
Thank you for asking. Maybe we should sell them. Probably should be that chocolate. I never can work with chocolate without it migrating over to the apron. I don't usually even wear an apron. But the thing is that when we got married, the Publishers Weekly reviewed one of our books, and they said they called us partners in crime, which I just loved. So when we got married, the production editor, the head of production, Marina Pedakis, whose wonderful Greek cookies, the koularakia, are in the book as well. She sent it as a present and had it embroidered. So unless you're a partner in crime, I don't know. We'll have to find out. I'm sorry we can't just give you yours.
That's our generic answer.
They are fantastic. And thank you both so much for joining us, Rose and Woody. It's been a delight. Thank you
Thank you for all the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
And And most of all, Alexandra, thank you for being so helpful and telling us how to prep and how to do the technology, all of you.
Oh,
that are involved.
this has been a joy. I just want to make sure everyone check out their website. There's so much good stuff. The link to the Cookie Bible, and check out our website for upcoming programs. And if you'd like to, we post the link to support the library for Giving Tuesday. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great morning.
And we hope to come back in 2024 with a cake Bible.
We would love to have you back. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Baking for Thanksgiving. Happy baking for Thanksgiving and holidays that come to you.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.